Hi folks, Stevie here. I'll give you fair warning, this isn't going to be the most exciting video you've ever seen in your life. It's a run through on how to change your fork seals on a 2016 CRF 1000. This film's made specifically for fellow Africa Twin owners who might be considering doing this job themselves. This is a job I've been dreading, mostly because I haven't been able to find any other videos that gave me enough close-up information and enough detail and didn't miss out any critical steps. So I'm going to try and make a video with all the information that I would have liked to have seen. But I'm going to ask a favour. If, as an Africa Twin owner, you see value in this video, if you give it a thumbs up and subscribe, it's going to put my content in front of other riders and help the channel to grow. Right, let's get into it. Before we do anything, we need to order the parts. Obviously, we're going to need a set of fork seals. My bike is now 6 years old and it's done very near 50,000 miles. So I'm going to replace the guide bush and the slider bush as well, and a rubber o-ring on the top of the fork bolt assembly, and a small copper washer on the fork centre bolt at the bottom of the fork leg. You'll need 1.5 litres of your chosen fork oil. The standard oil is 10 weight. I'm using 15 weight as I tend to run the bike quite heavy when camping, and I'd like to firm it up a touch. I've also been given a loan of some specialist tools by my mate Kyle. These are manufactured by K-Tech Suspension and available as a bike specific fork tool kit for £105, and the K-Tech fork driver is £45. You can pick up inexpensive seal drivers from as little as £10, and here are a few dimensions that might help you make home brew alternatives. The last thing to mention is I'm going to try and use the component terminology that's in the Honda service manual, so that if you're following along with the manual, you'll be able to tie everything up. Getting started now, I'm only going to remove one fork leg from the bike at a time to support the mudguard and braking system whilst the bike's apart, and give me a reference to fork leg level in the top bridge when it comes time to reassemble. The right hand fork leg is currently okay, so I'm going to start with the left hand fork leg, which you can see is leaking badly. The first thing to do before tearing the forks out is to slacken off and record the current adjustment positions of the rebound damping and the spring preload at the top of the fork bolt. Count the number of turns out anti-clockwise that can be achieved until you get to the stop on the adjusters. Don't force anything, you shouldn't find these to be in any way tight. I found that the compression damping adjusters at the bottom of the fork legs were seized solid. If you find the same, don't force them whilst they're on the bike. That's easily fixed on the bench. Slacken, but don't remove the top bridge pinch bolts, and then break the tension on the fork bolts at the top of the fork leg whilst it's still on the bike. Remove the left hand brake caliper, then pull the axle and remove the front wheel. Unscrew the bolts that secure the mudguard to the fork leg and release the ABS sensor. Slacken the bottom bridge pinch bolts and work the fork leg free from the bike. So this one's in a right state. It started leaking a few days before I was due to go touring around Ireland 4 months ago, and I've managed a cheeky 3,500 miles on it since it started leaking. Mount the axle holder in the vise with soft jaws and unscrew the fork leg bolt. Slide back the outer pipe and mount the horseshoe tool upon the spring collar. Pull the spring collar down into the spring's compression and insert the piston rod plate between the lock nut on the inside of the fork bolt and the spring collar. Slacken the lock nut from the fork bolt and unscrew the fork bolt from the damper rod. Fully withdraw the fork bolt assembly. Keep an eye out for the white plastic retainer that mates with the spring collar under the top of the fork bolt. I've seen that sometimes coming away with the spring collar, but on this occasion it stayed firmly inside the fork bolt and needed to be prized out with a hook at a later stage. Pull back on the horseshoe tool, release the piston rod plate and release the spring compression gently. Be careful not to do this. That would have been fun. Try to keep anything you take out of the fork leg in the same alignment and orientation that it comes out, so that everything goes back the same way. Then you can turn the fork leg upside down and start to pour the oil out of it. You might find at this stage that the spring comes free. If it does, align it with the fork bolt assembly that you removed earlier. Pump the fork leg across its range of travel whilst you do this to get as much of the old oil out of the damper rod as possible. Given the length of time this has been leaking, I was amazed at how much oil was still in it, and I was relieved that there was no metal grindings. Back in the vise and onto the fork centre bolt at the bottom of the fork leg that carries the compression dampers. Slacken and remove the fork centre bolt. You'll find that when you brake the torque that the damper rod inside the fork leg will rotate as you turn the fork centre bolt. But this is easily held with your fingers. If, when you stripped the fork leg from the bike, you found the compression damping adjusters to be seized like I did, drop them into a small tub of penetrating fluid to soak whilst your focus is elsewhere. We'll come back to this later. With the fork centre bolt removed, the damper rod can be withdrawn. Keep an eye out for the damper rod's centering plate, a small bush that sometimes come out at this point, but on this occasion it's retained within the fork leg. Prise out the dust seal spring and carefully ease out the dust seal without damaging the top of the fork leg. Pick out the stopper ring from its recess. Then give the outer pipe a good tug from the fork leg, which will separate the outer leg from the fork leg assembly, and lay it all out on the bench in the order it came apart. Give everything a good wipe down with clean, lint-free rags to remove any remaining traces of the old oil. Now this is one of the images that would have helped me before doing the job. A clear picture of everything stripped down so I could visualise it. I would have also seen value in having this shot to understand which parts I truly needed to replace and which parts could be reused. I hummed and hawed whether to replace the backup ring between the oil seal and the guide bushing, but that's just a heavy metal washer. There's absolutely no need to replace the backup ring. Remove the old slider bush and lay it out on the table. The guide bush and backup ring easily follow and should be laid out in their removal order. Wrap a single ring of tape around the sharp edges of the recess that the slider bush sits in and slide the old oil seal across it. You don't need to worry about damaging the old seal, but the tape helps guide it off smoothly. Remove the stopper ring and the old dust seal. Line your new components out alongside the old items and pour a small quantity of new fork oil into a clean container. Run a light smear of new fork oil across the inner faces of the new dust seal and the new oil seal. Lower the dust seal swiftly across the protective insulating tape down onto the fork leg. Follow with the original stopper ring, the new oil seal, the original backup ring and the new guide bush. Remove the tape and ease on the new slider bush. Mount the seal driver upon the fork leg between the oil seal and the stopper ring. It's worthwhile putting a cable tie around this to hold the two halves together. Run a light smear of clean fork oil inside the seal recess and offer it over the fork leg. Position the guide bush and backup ring centrally up inside the outer pipe and ease a new oil seal into the start of its recess. Use a seal driver to drift the new seal fully into its recess. Push the stopper ring into its groove. Examine the stopper ring in its position carefully to ensure it's fully engaged, then ease the dust seal into its recess. Back to the fork centre bolt compression damper. I left these soaking in a small tub of penetrating fluid earlier. Put it in the vise and tighten it snugly, but not so tight that you might deform it. Get as large a screwdriver as you can into the slot to minimise the risk of slipping, and work the adjuster back and forward a little at a time. The problem here is that the inner adjuster is corroded to the outer body of the bolt. There is no seizure inside the mechanism. Now that I'm starting to get some movement, I'll put it back into the penetrating fluid for 10 minutes to get more lubricant into the seizure, and I'll repeat this process until it operates smoothly. This is well worth doing as replacement fork centre bolts are £36 each and are special order parts, so could delay the rebuild. Now we can continue rebuilding the fork leg with a damper rod, making sure that we include the centering plate that locates it towards the fork centre bolt. It can be helpful to insert a screwdriver from the other end to guide the damper rod into its required position. Put the new copper washer on the repaired centre bolt and work it into the damper rod threads. As you start getting into the threads, you might find that the damper rod rotates inside the fork leg, which you can hold still with your fingers. Once hand tight, tighten the fork centre bolt to 34 Newton meters. Measure out 721 millilitres of new fork oil in a clean jug. Mount the fork leg in the vise standing vertically with the outer pipe drop down to the axle holder and slowly fill the inner fork leg. You might need to let the newly filled fork leg settle for a minute or two before you can pour in all 721 millilitres. Cover the top of the outer pipe and slowly work it up and down a few times to begin circulating the oil around the fork leg. Fit the piston rod pull-up tool and work the damper rod up and down a couple of times to ensure the oil has fully passed through the damper. Oh, don't do that. Lift that up. Remove the piston rod pull-up tool and leave the fork leg to stand undisturbed for 5 minutes to settle. If you've done this before, you probably don't need to do this bit, but if it's your first time, make yourself a dipstick to check the oil level in the fork leg. You're looking for the oil to be 95mm from the top of the chromed fork leg. As you can see here, I have about 30mm too much oil. So set yourself up with a syringe with some hose upon it and a cable tie set to 95mm. Position the cable tie at the top of the chrome fork leg and suck out the overfill. Gently lower the spring down into the fork leg and refit the piston rod pull-up tool. Pass the spring collar over the piston rod pull-up tool and lift the damper rod so that the spring collar can drop over it. Refit the horseshoe tool onto the spring collar, then install the upper spring seat stopper. Pull the spring collar and the horseshoe tool downwards and insert the piston rod plate between the spring seat collar and the lock nut on the damping rod. You can then remove the damper rod attachment tool. Put a new O-ring onto the fork bolt and offer the fork bolt assembly into the damper rod. Screw the fork bolt onto the damper rod until it meets the lock nut, which you should then tighten snugly. Remove the tooling and slide the outer pipe up until it reaches the fork bolt and tighten as much as you can by hand. Give the fork leg a few pumps to make sure it's operating as would be expected, then place in the vise for 5 minutes to check for leaks. Replace the fork leg back on the bike, tighten the lower bridge pinch bolts, then replace the mudguard fasteners. That will allow you to remove the other fork leg and repeat the process. Having filmed and completed the first fork leg, knowing what to expect, the second fork leg took me less than 2 hours to strip, clean and refurbish. Reassemble the second fork leg onto the bike and tighten all the bottom bridge pinch bolts. Tighten both fork bolts within the top bridge to 35 Newton meters, then complete the reassembly of the bike. The final step is to reset all the suspension settings. I'm starting with the previously seized compression adjusters as I don't know where they were set. So I'll start at the middle of the 12-stage range and I'll adjust them as I need to on the road. I'll return the spring preload adjusters to the setting they were found at the start of the job. I'll do the same with the rebound damping and then I can get out for a gentle test ride. This is the biggest jump of them all here. Woohoo! Okay, so it's been a successful exercise. Hopefully this video will give other owners a reliable insight into what's involved. If it does, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to increase its visibility. Thanks for watching.